Merriam-Webster defines a cuboid as being approximately cubical in shape and/or relating to or being the cuboid. It also defines it as the outermost bone in the distal row of tarsal bones of many higher vertebrates. Therefore, one can infer that if you were to build a tiny home on your foot, then you would in essence have built a cuboid outpost. If you're interested in hearing more about feet, then this is not the right place, but if you want to know why, Cuboid Outpost is the perfect on-ramp to exploring a litany of some of the most popular mods that can be found today, then stick around for more. Cuboid Outpost begins with us being stranded and alone on a barren planet with nothing but our wits, endless snow, and a state-of-the-art functional living facility. However, will we survive? Luckily for us, before we lost contact with our homeworld, they were able to send us a quick start guide to surviving, thriving, and traveling to new dimensions. How a multiversal civilization doomed themselves is not important to the narrative, but as the sole survivor, it's up to us to restart civilization. The start of the tech progression is quite unique. Instead of grinding, washing, crushing, or sieving, we were given an iron pick and told to dig beneath the snow to locate our first ore, not so goodium. Breaking the block rewards you with pieces that are assembled into chunks and smelted into ingots that work in much the same way as regular iron ore, albeit with more expensive crafting recipes, as it's not so good. But in a relatively short time, we can accrue enough ingots to make a smasher to harvest ore at an even faster rate, and a smoosher to double the yield from our chunks, which leads perfectly into the first main task of the pack: the production of quantum singularities. Step aside Avarita, as these singularities are much cheaper to produce and not nearly as grindy. The main gimmick of this pack is the singularity resource generators. They come in many flavors, but after the first chapter, you're not going to be crafting any apart from the highest tier for its fastest operational speed. As the name implies, you slap in a quantum singularity of the resource you'd like, and the generator spits out that resource at an incredible speed. Even the later resources get produced at nearly half a stack a second, which makes resource scarcity a non-issue in this pack. Nearly every important resource has a singularity that can be produced after a relatively short and easy grind. Now, at this point, we start the Green Revolution and do some recycling, which I found to be a quite innovative mechanic. Because we have limited resources, we will recycle some of our more advanced machines to cannibalize the parts and reuse them for our current needs. The pack presents this as a dangerous thing that can fail, but in practice you will always get enough materials from recycling to progress the pack. These are then followed by the Singularity power generators, which, as you may have guessed, produce power from singularities. The power rate varies depending on what you plug in, but generally a single power generator is enough to power everything in the early game, and by the time you need more power, there are much better and more efficient options available. Now in the early game, what exactly are we powering? Why, quantum transmutation, of course. Not so goodium ore is pretty useless in the grand scheme of things, but using transmutation, we can turn what scarce resources we do have into something more valuable: dirt. After following a convoluted but fun transmutation chain, we can produce a single block of dirt, an oak sapling, and grow our first pieces of wood, which marks the end of subchapter 1. After that, we move into sifting resources, because now that we have dirt, we can make pebbles, and by combining those pebbles into various rocks and sifting them, we can start generating 6 of the metals needed to complete progression. You can also sift gravel for thermal expansion ores, but until the end game, these items pose no use to us overall. Taking about as long as subchapter 1, subchapter 2 ends there. Getting Creative is the name of subchapter 3 and is one of the shortest available, as it exists for one express purpose: the creation of a single iron nugget. Using Create's vanilla mechanics, it guides you in building a simple gravel washing machine to obtain iron nuggets. Now I found this a bit of progression to be quite funny, because normally you'd think you'd be running this machine to slowly produce nuggets to make your iron and then make an iron singularity, but it also introduces a recipe for converting iron nuggets into ingots via transmutation. And since we all know that an iron ingot converts back into 9 nuggets, you can completely turn the machine off after you receive a single nugget, because you can just keep transmutating the nuggets back into ingots and back into nuggets over and over and over again, which is far faster than the washing method. Regardless, the iron singularity is only 160 ingots, which means after a short while, you won't need transmutation anyway. Then, after the shortest chapter, comes one of the longest. Getting No Tinks Done should be renamed to Getting Nothing Done, as in this chapter we are tasked with producing soul sand, netherrack, and endstone, which is extremely tedious, in part because of the amount of lava required to craft the necessary amount of blocks needed. At this stage in the game, there is no way to produce lava in generous amounts, and we have to rely on ex nihilo barrel heating, which is extremely slow, and while it can be automated, it's far faster to just spam barrels to produce as much lava as possible, because it takes a full bucket of lava to produce a single netherrack or endstone block. Needing 160 of each to produce the singularities, this took an incredible amount of time. Now, if you look into the guidebook, it does show you how you can automate the entire process using XNet, but I went ahead and was stubborn and just filled a jerry can with lava every once in a while and slowly completed it while finishing other tasks. Then, for some odd reason, we have to use Voodoo to summon a blaze for blaze rods, which don't come into play until after we're given access to the Nether, which made it pretty moot, and I don't understand why that part was included. Now, if you are playing with Create, then summoning blazes before access to the Nether is useful for the boiler, but other than that, it just seemed out of place. Later, you can easily gather blaze rods just by sifting for blaze powder and combining it back into rods, and ultimately, the end goal here is to get gold from sifting crushed netherrack and producing a gold singularity. The final 3 subchapters then allow you to dip your toes into mechanism, immersive engineering, and applied energistics without having to actually delve deeply into the mods themselves. This isn't a case where you must get to the end game of each mod before progressing, you just need to make a few early game machines to get a couple needed crafting items. In conclusion, Chapter 1 exists to guide the player into learning how to generate resources and gives them the opportunity to continue to explore the individual mods without making them mandatory, which is a key theme of the mod pack. Chapter 2, on the other hand, guides you into different food types and crop farming, which was nice for immersion, but with exploration being extremely easy due to cheap jetpacks, I found keeping a backpack stocked with random food worked too well and trivialized the entire process, and meant that after crafting a bunch of food once, I didn't need to craft anymore. Chapter 3 then introduces a few new mods that all work together. The Rainbow Furnace Arc gives you easy access to insane energy generation. Powa then uses that energy for its expensive crafts, and Industrial Foregoing and Thermal Expansion build off of that infrastructure. Now, some of the thermal expansion machines did seem kind of shoehorned into some of the later recipes, like requiring a blast chiller to produce a late game required item, but generally, you were not expected to fully automate the late game ores of thermal expansion and industrial foregoing, which I found to be a nice change of pace. Now, some of the more advanced alloys did have singularities, which made using them extremely easy, but the only tedium to be found would come from industrial foregoing, which for some reason lacked a lot of the usual in-game documentation I've known in other versions. Luckily, the important things were described in the guidebook, so I didn't have to spend my time looking things up elsewhere. Chapter 4 then finished pretty fast. You're tasked with headed to the end and the Nether to locate a few key items, none of which are hard to find or in low supply, and quickly moves into Chapter 5, which is where some grind begins, as does any pack that requires the use of extended crafting of singularities. Now in this case, every singularity required 2,000 items to craft, but all of which had their own quantum singularity, so if you took the time to make them in advance, then by the time you finish exploring the end and the Nether, you should have easily stockpiled enough resources to craft the ultimate singularity many times over. Then, after combining the final key items, you can craft Energized That'ldovium and finally escape the Cuboid Outpost. A short but sweet pack, you can tell a lot of love went into its production. All in all, it took me around 30 hours to complete the pack without doing every single objective available in the quest book. And while I felt it was very easy, I would recommend this mod pack to anyone that hasn't tried modded Minecraft before, because it allows a simple on-ramp and guidance into many popular mods you can find in most mod packs. If you're a hardcore expert player, this pack may be too simple for you, but for anyone else, it's a great guided experience. I rate the pack highly, and while the mod pack author hasn't released anything since, I would be more than willing to try out the next thing they come up with. As always, I'm your host, Hummus28, and I'll see you all next time.